Hi guys, welcome to my channel, where we use gentle movement sessions to build strength, improve coordination, and increase mobility so that you move better and feel stronger. Today, I'm going to be taking you through a Feldenkrais session. So grab a mat, lie down on your back, and let's get started. Today, we're doing a lesson called Gentle Hand Waving, where we use small movements to wake up the muscles of your dominant hand, your fingers, your wrist, your upper arm and shoulder, to relieve tight muscles of the arm and help the movement of the arm become more efficient and also better supported by your ribs and torso. Start lying on your back and firstly notice how your two arms lie on the floor. How close are your arms to your torso? Which way are your hands turned? Are your elbows lying face down or turned out? And do your arms feel tense or comfortable? How are your shoulders resting on the floor? Your ribs, your back, your hips, your legs, and your feet. How are they all lying on the floor? And where are you breathing into right now? Your ribs, your stomach, or just shallow breaths into your diaphragm? Now focus on your dominant hand, so your right hand if you're right-handed, or your left hand if you're left-handed. And roll your hand so your palm faces the ceiling, and then roll it so that the palm faces the floor. And just do that a couple of times and notice how your forearm moves your hand and your arm bone moves your hand. Now bend your dominant arm so your elbow is at 90 degrees, your hand is relaxed and draped so your wrist is bent, then extend your wrist so your fingers move towards the ceiling, and then return them to the start position where they're draped. And then just keep repeating this, noticing which muscles turn on in the wrist to extend the wrist, and then notice that those same muscles need to let go for your hand to drape again. And just keep doing this a few more times. And as you do this, notice how smoothly you're doing this movement and how far through your arm you can feel things happening to allow this really small and easy and gentle movement to happen. Let this be the last one. Then rest your hand in that draped position and now only move your index finger up and then down, keeping the rest of your fingers still and your wrist still. Focus on how smoothly you can move this index finger or your pointer from the knuckle closest to your palm, and keep your breath easy and try to avoid holding your breath while you try to focus on movements that need you to concentrate and increase your dexterity. Just do the index finger one more time and then move on to the middle finger, lifting it up, then down. Keep your index finger, your ring finger, and your wrist still as your middle finger moves up and down in space. Again, focusing on your breath being easy and trying to make this movement of your finger as smooth as possible. Feel what's going on in your wrist, your forearm, your upper arm, and even your shoulder. Then move on to the ring finger or the third finger. And can you move this finger without moving the little finger? Often it's difficult to only move your ring finger and not your little finger because they usually work together. But just see whether you can stay with a small range of motion for that ring finger and move only it without moving the little finger, and see how smooth you can make this movement. And now move on to the little finger, lifting it, then lowering it. And with your little finger, see how smoothly you can make this movement happen without any big flicking movements. So now we're working on the smooth control of this part of your hand. Again, can you keep your breathing easy? And just notice how far through your wrist, forearm, upper arm, and shoulder you can feel things happening to allow this little finger to move. Then move on to the thumb, moving it towards your torso and away from your torso. So this is an extension and flexion movement of your thumb, even though it's moving sideways relative to the other fingers. Keep your wrist relaxed, the rest of your fingers still as your thumb moves out and in. Keeping your breathing relaxed. And then go back to that first movement of extending your wrist so your fingers move towards the ceiling, and then relaxing your wrist so your hand drapes. Is that any easier or smoother than before? And then let your hand go down beside you again and rest. Then bend your arm again, once again with your hand draped and your elbow at 90 degrees. Then move your fingers towards your chest so you rotate your forearm from your elbow and your hand moves like a periscope. And then turn your hand so your fingers move away from your chest and that periscope looks towards your toes. And then keep doing this turning movement of your forearm from your elbow. And just see how smoothly you can turn your hand to look at you, and then turn your hand to look at your feet. And notice which parts of your forearm muscles, your upper arm muscles, and your shoulder muscles are involved in this movement. Now as you turn your hand towards your head, move your hand towards your shoulder so your elbow bends a little bit. And then as you turn your hand towards your feet, let your arms straighten a tiny bit. And then do that again, turning your palm towards your head and bending your elbow so your hand comes towards your shoulder. And then as you turn your hand towards your feet, you extend your arm a little bit so your hand comes a bit closer to the floor. And just keep making that bending and straightening of the elbow a little bit bigger with each movement. And feel what that does through your shoulder when your wrist turns as your arm bends, and then it turns the other way as your arm extends. Then let your arm rest beside you, and just notice where you're breathing into now, and whether there's any change in how your shoulders are lying. Then once again bend your arm so your hand is relaxed. Then extend your arm towards the ceiling. Then bend your arm so your elbow rests on the floor again. Then again reach your arm up and then bend it back in. And can you let your fingers face your feet as your arm extends so your elbow turns out? And then let your hand face your chest as you bend your arm so your elbow faces in. So you can feel your arm bone turning in your shoulder socket as you extend your arm. Then your arm bone turns the other way as your elbow lowers. Just do 2 more of these. And last one. Then keep your elbows straight so your wrist is directly above your shoulder. Then extend your wrist so your fingers lengthen towards the ceiling. Then drape your wrist so your fingers lower towards the floor. And keep doing this movement and notice what's different with your arm straight compared to when it was bent. Your wrist extensors are still lifting your hand and then letting go to let your hand drape, but now you'll be feeling something else happen through the shoulder and your upper arm as you extend your wrist and then drape it. Just do one more where you extend your wrist, feeling what happens through your arm, drape your wrist, then bend your elbow, lower your hand to the floor and rest. Then again, bend your arm, extend your arm towards the ceiling, feeling your elbow turn out. Then turn your fingers so that periscope looks towards your head again. Then turn your fingers so your periscope or your fingers look towards your feet. And keep doing this movement now, noticing just as before, what's different in the way you move your hand when your arm is straight compared to when it's bent. You'll still feel your forearm turning from your elbow joint, but now you'll also feel your arm bone rotating in the shoulder socket to help your hand move a little bit further than it otherwise would if your arm was bent. So you've got both the radio ulnar joint at the elbow and your shoulder socket providing rotation abilities for your hand now, as it turns one way and then turns the other. Now as you do this, lift your shoulder and then lower it. Do this by lifting your shoulder as your hand turns towards your feet, and then lowering your shoulder as your hand turns towards your chest. Breathe out as you lift your shoulder and your hand turns towards your feet. Breathe in to lower your shoulder, turning your hand towards your chest. And just notice what movements need to occur through your ribs and through your spine, and further down through your torso towards your hips and your feet as you turn your hand this way and lift your shoulder and lower it, and then rest your arm down on the floor, having a small rest. Then bend your elbow, lifting your arm up to the ceiling again. Then lift your shoulder now as you turn your hand towards your chest. Then lower your shoulder, turning your hand towards your feet. So we're doing the opposite turning and lifting to what we were doing before. Remember to breathe out as you lift your shoulder and breathe in as you lower it. And then notice the different way your chest and your ribs have to move as you lift your shoulder and then lower it with your hand turning this way. Just do this one more time, feeling how your ribs and shoulder interact to move your hand, and then lower that back down. Once again, bend your arm and straighten it towards the ceiling. And now instead of lifting your arm, move your arm slightly to the right and slightly to the left. And just feel how your arm bone moves side to side in your shoulder socket. Feel the muscles that have to lengthen for your arm to move in over your chest, and which muscles need to lengthen for you to move your arm out away from your chest. Feel what happens in your shoulder blade and your collarbone as you move your arm bone side to side. And what happens through the back of your ribs and through your hips, your head and your jaw as you do this. The next time your arm comes to the center, keep it in the center, lift your shoulder, then drop the shoulder onto the floor. Lift, then drop. And keep doing this, keeping your elbow straight, trying to feel a ricochet through your wrist as your shoulder drops. So the force of the shoulder drop bypasses your elbow straight to your wrist. Then let your arm go down and rest. Once again, roll your palm towards the ceiling and then towards the floor, just as you did at the beginning of today's session, and notice whether that feels any different from before. Then bend your arm, lift your arm towards the ceiling with your wrist draped, and make your little finger and thumb touch one another. Keep your wrist drape and extend your 3 other fingers towards the ceiling, then lower them back down. Lifting the 3 middle fingers up and then draping them down. Keeping your little finger and thumb touching as though this is a shadow puppet of a crane that you're making with your hand. Again, feel what the work is in your wrist extensors, so your forearm muscles, and your shoulder muscles as you do this movement. Now as you lift your middle 3 fingers, also extend your wrist. As you lower your middle 3 fingers, drape your wrist. And again, keep your breathing easy and just notice what's going on in your forearm muscles, your arm muscles, and your shoulder as you do this. And whether it feels better to turn your arm as you extend your wrist and then drape it, or does it feel better just to let it rest still where it is as your wrist extends and lowers? What feels better for you and easier? Let that go, drape your wrist, keeping your arm straight, and now do small circles with your hand above your shoulder socket. So your arm bone is now moving in a small circle in your shoulder socket. Do a breath out to do 1 circle, and then a breath in to do another circle. And then reverse that. Doing a small circle the other way as you breathe out, and then as you breathe in. And gradually make this circle a tiny bit bigger with every movement. So this circle is almost like a spiral. Make sure you stay within a comfortable range of motion for you. So if the tiny 10-cent coin circle that you are doing at the beginning is the maximum circle you can do to feel comfortable, stay with that range of motion. Bend your arm, let your arm rest on the floor, and rest. Once again, roll your hand so your palm faces the ceiling, then the floor a few times. Notice whether that's any easier. Then lift your arm up to the ceiling, so your arm is straight. Then bend your elbow so the back of your palm touches your sternum or breastbone. Your elbow will be facing the ceiling, and hold your dominant elbow with the other hand. Then, keeping your back of your hand against your breastbone, do a small circle with your dominant elbow, moving it with your non-dominant hand. And notice that to do this circle, your shoulders move on the floor, your ribs move, your back muscles roll, your spine has movement in it, and even the lower torso and hips might be moving as well. Then stop in the center and reverse that circle now, still moving your elbow with your non-dominant hand. And feel the way that your chest and ribs and back need to move now as your arm does this circle. Notice as your arm circles that your whole chest, ribs and spine do a circle with your arm and the other hand. Let your arms rest beside you again. And notice any difference in how your arms are lying on the floor now, how close they are to your torso, how your shoulders feel, and how your back, pelvis, and legs are lying. Once again, roll your hand towards the floor, towards the ceiling, and check how that feels now. If you'd like, you can repeat on the other side, or just notice how different your arm feels now, and try to carry that through to have easier movements through your arm, supported by your torso, for the rest of the day. Thanks for joining me today. I hope you had a great session. Please like and subscribe, and I'll see you again soon.